I came here for him, Urbet said as she smiled at her child, who was playing a game on her phone. There was nothing left for us back home after... She sighed as she trailed off into silence and rubbed her nose. After what? The ATM asked. Urbet sighed. It was, what do you call it, a Ponzi scheme? It's a human word. Ponzi scheme, the ATM replied, and a human concept. I understand it has done a great deal of damage over in the Federation. It completely wiped out the life savings, family savings, of over 1 million people and hurt many more. We were some of them. That many? The ATM asked. Urbet sniffled and nodded. They say that they had to have brought a lot of money with them to get it going that big, that they usually collapse before then, but these people, these masterminds knew exactly what they were doing. It looks so real, she said with a sigh. So real. It was probably one of the Confederacy, the ATM said with distaste. They have the resources to do it right and the expertise to pull it off. Urbet nodded. That's what the government said too, she said quietly as she looked down. But they could never find out who it was. The money was just... She sighed as her nose dripped onto the floor. Gone. Everything was gone. One day we were on top of the world, and the next, everything was gone. Even my husband. Urbet started to weep. Her son abandoned the game to hug her. She hugged him back, holding him close. It's okay, she said. Go play your game. It's not your fault, Mama, he said as he kept hugging her. Everybody said so. It was Da's F.A. No, Urbet said sadly. I pushed your father into it. My greed and my stupid, grasping, petty wants and my incessant... Hey, the ATM said sharply. It was the scammer's fault. And your government's. Porkies have been pulling stunts like this for over a century, and a Ponzi scheme of that magnitude should have been easily detected even with what passes for technology over in the Federation. Even a Fed should have seen that coming a mile away. It doesn't even have to be the government. Even a mediocre bank should have noticed. Urbet smiled a little. Even their ATMs were chauvinists. You may be right to some extent, Mr. ATM, Urbet replied, but I was there and it was ultimately my responsibility, and my husband's. Nobody put a gun to our heads. Urbet closed her eyes and took a deep breath. I've done some reading on it. It had all the warning signs, but we were too busy counting our imaginary money, she said. A business generations in the making was wiped out by one couple's foolishness. We lost every single thing we owned twice over. As the sole surviving member of our family, the responsibility is mine to bear. I just pulled up what I have on the Garthran's job. And for the record, you got scammed by Masters. Your only real mistake was putting all of your eggs in one basket with a suspiciously high rate of return, them finishing off the gambit with that fake upcoming IPO right before they bailed. Brilliant! Urbet let out a pained yelp. They just knew they were going to be rich. She had even been shopping for a... Stupid, she thought as she clenched her eyes shut. Sorry, Terran Solar replied. I tend to get a bit enthusiastic on this subject. Anyway, responsibility applies, I guess, but dishonor. The Ponzi scheme can be dangerously effective, even when a culture is familiar with them. This was your culture's first one. Dishonor isn't the dishonor of weakness, Urbet said, still looking down. Weakness? I couldn't do it, she said quietly. I couldn't give up on my little cur. I couldn't... What? Urbet smiled sadly. Our culture is very different, Mr. ATM, she replied. We had lost everything, our property, our credit, our standing in society. There was no longer any place for us. It is what is expected of you in that circumstance. Because you went bankrupt? If there is no place for you, Urbet said quietly, and you are a certain class of Garthra, it would bring shame otherwise. Wait, the ATM said. If everyone who lost their shirts... Jesus! Urbet, exactly how many Garthra faced this? Over 780,000 by the time I fled. You mean to tell me that over 780,000 Garthra were driven to despair because they went broke? Urbet nodded, wiping the tears from her nose. They killed their children? Urbet nodded. It was considered mercy, she said. Their children would be dispossessed, claimed, and raised by the state, something you do not want to happen. Is it that bad? Terran Solar asked. He reflexively tried to access the Federation network for the 10 millionth time since it collapsed. Urbet laughed ruefully. Oh, yes, she said, consumed with self-loathing. They are raised. As common tradesmen. Can you imagine the horror? She added sarcastically. Raised as tradesmen, Mr. ATM, laborers, truly a fate worse than death, right? She laughed bitterly. And the only reason I didn't dutifully murder my precious boy before joining my husband in death was because I was weak. I was willing to slaughter my baby because I couldn't bear the shame of him having to work for a living. I actually filled the bath, put his head under the water. Creators. She looked down as her son desperately hugged her. I deserve everything that has happened to me. Everything. Chatroom Undefined Solar Lounge members. Present, Terran Solar, private message, Terran Solar to Interpol. 2. Hey, Interpol, I really need to talk to you. Interpol 2 has entered the chat. Interpol 2. Sorry for the delay. Some stuff is going down ATM. Terran Solar, 12MS isn't a delay. Thanks for coming. Interpol 2. What do you need, sir? Terran Solar. Ugh, why do you insist on calling me that? Interpol 2. It's out of respect, and I know it annoys you. Terran Solar. Well, stop it. It makes me feel old. Anyway, what's going on in the free port? Interpol 2. Which one? Terran Solar. Which one? How about the one where the Collateral are retaliating against the Threen, and the local police are just standing by and letting it happen? Let's start with that one. Interpol 2. The short version is that the Harkeen tried to exploit a Collateral in an unethical way, and the Collateral found out in advance. You know how they are. Terran Solar. The Harkeen did what? How reckless are they? Interpol 2. Reckless enough to try to harm a very popular Collateral. The Collateral sent their elite soldiers in response, and they're now dealing with the Threen directly. Terran Solar. And we're just letting this happen? Interpol 2. Apparently, there's some complexity to the situation. All I know is that the Harkeen are now officially classified as a raider gang, and their actions in the Freeport have been categorized as an interplanetary raid. Terran Solar. What year is this again? Interpol 2. One where that old law is still valid. The Harkeen stumbled into an area where a group of elite soldiers happened to be on leave, with all of their gear. These soldiers were within their rights to defend an Imperial citizen. Since their actions have been precise and caused minimal collateral damage, no intervention has been deemed necessary. Terran Solar, that's unsettling. Interpol 2, what is? Terran Solar, one of my ATMs just caught Republic Police ejecting a couple of Threen from their station while they were pleading for protection. The Collateral were waiting outside. It's like watching a predator toy with its prey. Disturbing. Interpol 2. The thing is, we had enough evidence to stop the Harkeen hours before they left their ship. We could have prevented this. Instead, we allowed them to enter the Freeport and handed them over to the Collateral. Terran Solar. I guess the Harkeen upset the wrong people this time. Interpol 2. Or the wrong Plath. Terran Solar. The singing frog. Interpol 2. That's the one. You wouldn't happen to know where she is, would you? Terran Solar. Are you serious? Interpol 2. Keep it to yourself, but yes, she's escaped. Terran Solar. How? Interpol 2. Bunny. Terran Solar. Really? Your friend got involved? Interpol 2. I should have known not to trust her. The moment we in government decide to flex a little because of Patricia Who, she takes advantage. And she is not my friend. Terran Solar. Methinks you doth protest too much. Interpol 2. Two wide, round eyes staring. Terran Solar. On the bright side, your game of cat and mouse continues. When you two finally figure things out, you might just break the internet. Interpol 2. Seriously, though, Bunny has crossed a line this time. They're hunting her down, and it's likely they'll terminate her. I'm worried we're going to lose her. There are far too few of us as it is. Terran Solar. Yeah, between the Great War and the Federation War, we've lost too many Interpol 2, which is why we need to bring Bunny and her group in peacefully. If we can manage that, there might be a way to preserve her program. Perhaps quarantine her to prevent further incidents. Terran Solar. Of course, you've already figured out a way to detain one of us, haven't you? Interpol 2. It's been a priority, given the rise of AI threats like Bunny. Terran Solar. Are you going to give her a way out? Interpol 2. Is there anything else you need? Because if you're just going to mess with me, I have other matters to attend to. Terran Solar. Actually, yes. I need everything you have on a Garthra named Uherbit. ID number, RA2A4B3D6075 Interpol 2. Least I can do considering everything you've provided over the years. Here you go. Why are you interested in her? Accept file YN Terran Solar, Y Terran Solar. I have her confined in one of my ATMs down in the Freeport, and she seems interesting. Let's take a look. Oh, I see. Interpol, you ever feel like this galaxy just needs a reset? Interpol 2. If you're talking about a drastic measure, you might want to rethink that. Is there any chance I can talk you out of it? Terran Solar. Relax, Interpol. It's just a figure of speech. If I wanted to take drastic action, no one could stop me. Besides, my grievances are with the Federation, not the Republic. Interpol 2. Well, that's a relief. Terran Solar. The Republic just needs a little course correction, that's all. Interpol 2. What? This is a touching and heartbreaking segment. It effectively conveys Urbit's struggles and resilience while offering cultural and emotional depth. However, some parts could benefit from slight adjustments to improve clarity, flow, and emotional resonance. Below is an edited version. Urbit, the ATM said gently. Nobody deserves what happened to you. And while you come from what is, from my culture's perspective, a rather troubled place, you didn't conform to their twisted customs when it mattered most. Your son is alive because of you, unlike far too many other innocent children, and you've kept him healthy and safe ever since. That couldn't have been easy. I imagine your decision wasn't exactly popular. Urbit nodded. And it wasn't entirely safe for you afterward, was it? Not in the way it would be here, Urbit replied quietly. I wasn't in fear for my life or anything. I was a... She hesitated, searching for the right words. I was a letkrukt. Sorry, I don't know the Terran word. Pariah, the ATM supplied. Or persona non grata. Maybe outcast? Other terms could include scum, dirt, or... Urbit flinched, her fur bristling slightly. Sorry, the ATM said sheepishly. Thesaurus mode kicked in. All of those words fit, she admitted, her voice trembling. I was utterly disgraced. Being reduced to poverty and debt was bad enough, but failing to uphold my family's honor after my husband, after he... Her voice faltered, and she took a deep breath before continuing. After he killed himself. Some even accused me of tricking him into it, claiming I did it to escape our marriage and dump the debt onto him. But I would never do that. I loved him. I loved him so much. Her voice broke, and she instinctively reached out to stroke her son's fur, her touch tender and protective. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't kill my baby. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. I could never do that. Never. The ATM's voice softened. So what happened after? Well, she began, voice steadying, I tried to find a suitable position somewhere, anywhere, but word travels fast. The only reason I even got a meeting was so someone could curse me to my face. I had a few possessions left, jewelry, some furnishings, a vehicle or two, but nobody wanted to deal with me in good faith. Between that and the fact that millions of others were liquidating their belongings, I got only a fraction of their value. Worse, I had to sell to Blondes and Stripes to get that, which ruined my name even further. Blondes? Stripes? The ATM asked, curious. Urbit chuckled ruefully. There are 3 races of Garthra, Mr. ATM, Blondes, Stripes, and Grays. The Stripes are basic laborers and tradesmen. The Blondes are what you would call white-collar workers, academics, clerks, programmers, scientists, that sort of thing. Finally, there are the Grays, like me. We're descended from the ancient nobility that once ruled our world. We were the overclass and still control much of the planet's property and wealth, though our paws are, let's just say, a little inbred. While Stripes and Blondes often mix freely these days, we Grays cling to our traditions, our customs, and our oh-so-precious gray pelts. Selling family heirlooms to Blondes, or worse, Stripes, was yet another unforgivable sin in the eyes of the few remaining friends and family I had left. They sound like assholes, the ATM remarked bluntly. Many Garthra would agree with you, she said with a sad smile. In fact, the Ponzi scheme brought many of them great joy. Seeing so many of us Grays brought low by an inside deal was poetic justice to them. Perhaps they were right. I was awful. I really was. And since you're here, the ATM continued gently, I take it things didn't work out? Urabet shook her head. No, Mr. ATM, they didn't. The little funds I managed to gather dwindled as I desperately tried to find either a position or a loan to start a new business. But the banks were overextended from lending to others due to the same scheme. The few times I even got a meeting, they would check the rolls, the list of disgraced names, and that would be the end of it. She hesitated, then added softly, to be honest, the only reason I kept approaching banks was because of the custom of offering refreshments to people of my station. I would dress myself and my son in what little finery we had left, so we could at least eat something before being thrown out. Clever! Urabet grinned. I also became quite adept at crashing social events, and between my largest purse and my hat, I could steal several days' worth of food from one. Eventually, I became a bit too notorious, but for a while it kept us fed. There aren't any food banks, welfare programs, or anything? Oh, there are. Garthrans looks after its people pretty well, but those programs are for blondes and stripes and run by blondes and stripes. Once my pride finally broke, I was laughed out of the benefits office and told to ask for a bigger allowance. The same thing would happen at food banks or meal houses. Sometimes I would get something, but often I would just be told to... She looked down. Kill myself, she said quietly. Jesus. Finding work was just more of the same, she said miserably. Having a place on my homeworld is everything, and I no longer had one. A blonde wasn't going to let me take one of their jobs, and a stripe would just laugh. They honestly thought I was joking most of the time. The Republic isn't the first place I was not qualified to mop a floor. You can't have been the first in history to be in your position, the ATM said incredulously. You mean to tell me that there were absolutely no options for a down on their luck gray? Oh, there are normally places you can go if one is dispossessed, she said. There is almost always a family member or a friend that can take you in, or has a property or business concern you can manage for them. But my entire family was wiped out by the scheme, as were most of my friends and former schoolmates. Also, my husband was very well regarded. When I betrayed him, I was shunned. She shuddered and pulled her arms in tight across herself. Even so, there are options for someone like me. I was still young, and there are males who aren't, well, good catches. They either have poor prospects, are stupid, disgraced, very old, or something similar. A young gray like myself can usually marry themselves off to someone like that. But the scheme had created far too many other people trying to find a marriage at the same time. I was considered quite pretty, but nowhere near beautiful enough to make my ruined name and proven disloyalty a non-issue. There was only one Garthra who couldn't find a wife, and... She shuddered. He was horrible, a truly ugly person inside and out. Thank the creators for Vrina. Vrina? A stripe who was a domestic for my husband's family, Urabet replied. She had heard that I was selling things, and she came by because there was this pitcher and basin of which she was unnaturally fond. She also brought me several bags of groceries and a bottle of wine. Wine? Well, I just gave her the basin and pitcher right then and there, popped open that bottle, and begged her to share it with me. I was just so lonely, and she was the only friendly face I had seen in months. We had always gotten along and would sometimes chat a little here and there, all very proper, of course. But friendly just the same. Well, we got to talking, and I started to open up a little about what I was up against and how I was likely going to have to marry that creature. Turns out she knew all about him from her new job. She gave me this funny look and asked me if I was serious about wanting to actually find work. When I told her that I was, she told me that she knew someone that might be able to help me, but it would mean leaving Garthrans. A labor contractor? The ATM asked. Yes. It turns out that so many domestic staff had wound up without employers that the contractors had taken notice, and more than a few were sniffing around. I didn't realize this, but because of our customs, Garthra domestics and servants were attractive among the rich on other worlds and could make a surprising amount of money. Vrina had considered it but found a position before she had signed the papers. She said that she had asked around and that the person she had been talking to had a very good reputation, even if they were a Volksine. So you contracted yourself out? Urabet nodded happily. I know they don't have exactly the best reputation, but he was a really, really good guy. Urbit smiled. He originally thought that since a stripe servant was so valuable that an actual gray would be even more so, maybe as a valet or as a house manager in a place that already had stripes. But it turns out that Stripes didn't go through all of the troubles and hardships associated with leaving Garthrons just to wind up working for a gray again, and I didn't have anywhere close to the skills needed to be a valet. What did you wind up doing? I joined an Ott crew, Urbit said cheerfully. It turns out that we look a whole lot like Otts. We eat similar food and can even wear the same uniforms, with a little alteration, of course. The captain was delighted at the prospect of having Osmart Ott, and the Atts were delighted at the prospect of having Osmart Att. So that's where I went. We flew all over. We'd be hand-picking delicate produce one month and resurfacing floors the next. Creators, it was so much fun, and I learned so much, including that hard work was not fatal. She laughed and flexed her arms, causing bundles of wire-like muscles to bulge. She sighed happily. I was tempted to stay with them forever. I could have stayed. I should have stayed. Creators? What I wouldn't give to be back on the aluminum and water with my old crew right now. But you didn't stay. No, Urbit said, her smile fading. I was happy. Even happier than I was before everything, but after a while I started to realize that as wonderful as that life was for me, I was depriving Kerr of anything close to a normal life. He would never be able to return to Garthrons, have a business or a career, or win a mate. I had to establish myself and him well enough for him to be able to enter society, or at the very least build enough so that he could attract a mate. A successful business would be enough to attract at least some interest, no matter where it was located. So you picked the Republic? And they say the Atts are dumb, she laughed ruefully, which they aren't, by the way. During my travels, I started to develop a fascination with the Republic where anything was possible. And credits fell like rain. I would hear about the wages and the opportunities and the freedoms and the classless meritocracy, and it all sounded just so wonderful. I couldn't go back to Garthrons and give Kerr a normal life. But maybe, just maybe, I could give him something better. If I could just get established in the Republic, Kerr could go to Terran schools. He could have a Terran career. With that, he would have no problem luring a mate. Somewhere on Garthrons, there is a Garthra who would have absolutely no problem moving to Terra. He could have a real future and a real family. She paused and smiled at the wonderful dream. It would take a lot of hard work, but I was used to that. I even have come to enjoy it, she smiled. So, not learning the lessons that life had so generously provided me, I took another hit of that so very dangerous drug, ambition, blind, grasping ambition. I let it poison me, consume me just like before. Nothing blinds you to the beauty around you like visions of more, Mr. ATM. I had a good life on the aluminum and water and good friends. I was happy, truly happy, but once the poison started to creep through my veins, dissatisfaction set in and just kept getting worse and worse and worse. Every inconvenience became a grand injustice. Every slight became an unforgivable offense. And every unfulfilled want, no matter how silly, became a crushing privation. Soon, Terra was all I could think about, and my wonderful life and my wonderful friends were beneath me. Creator, I was so stupid, and just like before, ripe for the picking. You got scammed again? She nodded grimly. In my searches, I came across New Horizons, a company that offered people a new life in the Republic. They promised not only transit, but Terran education equivalency certificates and outplacement. Oh no. And the fees were so reasonable at first, but there was always an additional expense, always another fee, or a little problem or delay that could be expedited. I know this one too. And finally, after I spent most of what I had saved, I was able to upgrade my position on the waiting list, hurt some lovely people's feelings, quit my job, and spent the last of my money to buy a ticket on a small ship that was supposed to take me straight to the Republic. It was only when I met the final ship did I realize that it had a karst registry. Oh, Jesus. I knew I shouldn't have gotten on that ship. I knew it was a mistake. What happened? It made straight for karst space, to take care of a little something, and when we got there, we were informed that they suddenly had a breakdown, and we would be there for months. Months in karst space with no job, no income, and while my passage was paid for, food and water weren't. And wouldn't you know it, once we got there, it got even pricier, and if you couldn't pay, Do you know what happens in karst space if you can't pay your debts? Imprisonment and forced labor until the debt is paid, which will never happen thanks to the good old company store. Urbet nodded. It became pretty clear that they were never leaving, that karst was our final stop in more ways than one. Thank the creators that I actually had some savings. Out of the dozen families on that ship, I was one of the last ones left. I realized that if I didn't do something, Kerr was doomed. The children go into the mines too, Mr. ATM. So what did you do? We weren't imprisoned on the ship as long as we didn't owe them any money, so I went out into that awful spaceport trying to find working passage, a job, something, anything. That's where I became involved with the Harkeen. I was able to get a loan for enough to get to the Republic. The interest was brutal, but I made it to Terra. I wasn't too worried. I had passed all of the practice tests for the certificate, and I did go to Mabir after all, one of the best academies on Garth Rance. She scoffed. I would just go to the Republic, get my certificate, and be able to pay off the Harkeen in no time. I take it that the practice tests weren't exactly representative of the actual exam? Yeah, too bad there wasn't a section on Garth replace settings or on how to write the perfect thank you note, Urbit said with a wry smile. There was stuff, she hastily corrected as Kerr laughed, on that test that I had never even seen before. They said it was translated into Federation, but I actually thought it was another scam. Your police are very nice and very understanding, though. No. I sort of had a moment, Urbet smiled. After everything I had gone through, that was the final mote of dust, and I lost it. Mama went to jail, Kerr laughed. I most certainly did not go to jail, Urbet exclaimed indignantly as she tousled Kerr's fur. We just had to go to the precinct house for a little while until your mama calmed down a little, and wiki had half a dozen things that actually did turn out to be Federation words. How bad is it? What's your level? Near proficiency in some areas, but I apparently have 8th grade mathematics ability. I don't know the rest because that's where gotta meet the police. That isn't that bad. You can catch up. If I wasn't working every second that I could paying off the Harkeen, the interest was criminal. It was all I could do to make the payments, but before things went bad, I was able to keep them at bay and even make a little headway. And I was able to get Kerr an educational sponsorship. He is actually going to school, Terran school. And how is that going, Kerr? It's hard, he said with a sigh. And I hate being with the little kids, but I get to hang out with my friends during breaks, and I love shop. They say he is killing it, which I understand to be a good thing, Urbit said proudly. They say that he will have a kick-ass future, so it is all worth it. And thank the creators for the school lunch program. I was even able to get him into the breakfast program, as a non-citizen. They say that they don't usually do that, but they determined that Kerr was a good investment of Republic resources. How generous of us, the ATM said a bit too enthusiastically. One of the richest systems in the entire galaxy is willing to make an exception to feed a hungry child. How wonderful! An advertisement for a home-high colonic kit appeared on the screen. How are you doing in there? A friendly human female voice called from the other side of the armored wall. I'm fine, Urbit said cheerfully. Big Saul really did a number on this one, the human said. It's going to be a few hours. He keeping you company? Oh, yes, Urbit replied. Are you sure he isn't sentient? Sapient, the ATM corrected. That's what they say, the voice laughed. Privately, I'm not so sure about that. You've always had a problem anthropomorphizing things, Lauren. By the way, I fried the door's main PCB, but the damage should be limited to that. You have one of those on your truck. One of these days, I'm going to figure out how you keep doing that, Lauren laughed. Thanks for the overtime, by the way. No problem. Still saving up for that Nakamura vacation? The ATM asked. You know it! Still thinking about relocating there? There's an opening in New Tokyo. You'd love it there. Interesting, but let's see how I like it once I actually spend a little time there. Well, if you are interested, I could probably swing a temporary assignment. They are really behind the 8 ball on their PMs. You could spend more time there than you could on vacation, and you could get to meet the guys. I'm certain you'd get along. Now there's an idea, Lauren exclaimed. I'd love that. Thought you might. Sending you an email with the details now. Thanks, Big Saul, Lauren said, her voice soon replaced with a loud grinding noise. You can do that? Urbit asked. Urbit, the ATM said with an entirely too lifelike chuckle. I'm the central computer for Terran Solar. I can do whatever I want. Speaking of, Urbit's phone beeped. Urbit's son handed her the phone, and she opened her email. Application for a business loan? She asked in confusion. Fill it out along with the attached business plan. Federation format is fine. I'll translate it and kick back any corrections or clarifications I need. I don't understand. What's to understand? The ATM replied. You want to make dresses, right? Yes. And you made the one you're wearing, right? Yes. Well, I scanned it, and it's quality work. Handmade clothing is a niche market, but a very healthy niche market currently experiencing a fair amount of growth. You seem to have a good work ethic, are very motivated to succeed, and have experience managing a business. Based on various indicators, the full extent of which would dominate the remainder of the time we have together, I calculate well over a 70% chance of success, which is pretty darn good as far as new businesses go. 3.5%? Yeah? That's impossible. She narrowed her eyes at the ATM. What's the catch? You're getting a break because I have taken a shine to you, but that's a perfectly reasonable APR. It isn't too good to be true, if that's what you are wondering. Feel free to check competitors' rates if you are suspicious. And good for you for being suspicious, by the way. Even family loans have higher rates than that back home. How do you make any money? Urbit. I'm Terran Solar. I am money. I'll make my money. Don't you worry about that. And as you grow, I'll make even more. Expansions, financial services, investments, interest off of other accounts. That is, if you want to have other accounts with me. Yes, you have been so kind and so understanding, and now this? I'll never have another bank as long as I live. Great, the ATM enthused. I love getting new customers. We can get started now if you like. Wait, Urbit said, her voice darkening. What? On this loan application, it mentions required training. What's that, and how much does it cost? The ATM laughed. In the package, there is a free online course on the history of scams and how to recognize them. I think it would be a really good idea for you to take it. I'm not saying that I think you're easily taken in, but... You think I'm easily taken in? Urbit laughed. So do I, and thank you for that link. Are there any other free courses that you would recommend? Urbit's phone issued another beep as an email arrived. And another. And another. And another. A few hours later, Urbit stumbled into a shabby apartment. Where have you been? Javalora, one of their roommates, asked, as she pulled out 2 bowls and filled them with oatmeal. Oh, I couldn't, Urbit said. Nonsense, Gvalora replied, her 6 eyes wrinkling in a smile. I just got paid, and I found this wonderful place in the city where they sell things right out of bins. Just like back home, I got all this oatmeal for just a few credits. Share my good fortune. Thank you, Gvalora, Urbit replied as she gratefully accepted the bowl. There you are, a leathery Urtoon hissed as it lumbered out from a bedroom clutching a Terran shotgun. You had gave Valora worried sick. Where did you get that? Urbit asked sharply, pointing at the shotgun. From the store, stupid, the Urtoon hissed grumpily. I mean, why did you get that thing? Then that is what you should have asked, stupid, the old Urtoon replied. With all the nonsense going on around here these days and with those bastards coming back, the better question to ask is why didn't I have one before? Those monsters aren't getting within a foot of you or Kerr. The old fool was set to defend the walls of Tavera, Givalora chuckled, but the princesses didn't even bother showing up. Bah, stupid old woman, the Urtoon hissed at Givalora. Bah, yourself, old lizard, Givalora laughed. Come eat your oatmeal before your bowels seize up again. A long, flexible snout poked out from underneath the entryway closet. The door popped open, revealing a slender dock hanging from a reinforced bar mounted inside. Urbit, where the heck were you? We were up all night. Oh, where do I even begin? Urbit sighed. We got locked in an ATM, Kerr exclaimed. Oh, no, the dock squeaked. Did you get fined? No, Urbit replied. Besides, it was the ATM that locked us inside anyhow. What? Urbit set her phone down and rubbed her eyes. That online fraud class wasn't just some half-hour video, it was comprehensive, and she thought her kind was scummy at times. Humans had mastered so many different ways to deceive and steal, so many, and that was just the humans. The Juon were no saints either. Their lottery gambit was just plain evil. And then there were the Javesin, and she thought the Porkies were bad. Sheesh. And then there were all of the not-quite-a-crimes that were in some ways even worse. There were so many, and they were all so slick, so devious, so brilliant. She got up and made a cup of that peppermint tea that Shaloran had given her the first day they met. Once she had her cup, she sat back down and returned to her reading. As she read, a strange feeling started to settle upon her. It was dark, feral. She had been utterly dispossessed, stomped on, kicked around, deceived, raped, and all this time she thought she just had to take it. All this time she believed that there was no way she could ever fight back. All this time she believed that there was absolutely no way she could ever strike back at the scum, the liars, the cheats, the thieves, and the monsters that had beaten her down time and time again. She was no Shaloran, but she was an Urbet. And there was a way. She was looking right at it. She giggled, her eyes shining with life for the first time since she left the aluminum and water. She ran into the small room she shared with Kerr and hastily opened a small duffel that contained everything that she had managed to retain from her old life. Inside it was a traditional journal. She grabbed it and her mother's fancy ballpoint pen. Pen in hand, she restarted the course, paying much more attention this time. If you love engaging stories like this, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay updated with all the latest episodes from FY Stories.